And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball news and discussion. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Podcast on the Brink is a joint production of the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. For complete coverage of IU basketball, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com. Hey, so you might have heard about Blue Apron. That's the meal service company where they send you meals each week and they send you all the ingredients so it's ready to cook. Well, if you've been thinking about trying Blue Apron, go to insidethehall.com/Blue Apron and find out details for how you can get $30 off of your first order. And if you're interested in learning more and want to hear about my personal experience using Blue Apron, stick around for the end of this episode and I will share that story with you. And again, that URL is insidethehall.com/Blue Apron. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, our guest is Andy Bottoms, my co-host on the Assembly Call IU postgame show and one of the highest-rated bracketologists from the past 5 or 6 years, according to bracketmatrix.com. I was actually unable to participate in this conversation, but Andy and Alex really go into some depth about the Big Ten teams and where they stand in the current bracketing. Indiana, of course, still a little bit too far off the radar there, but teams like Nebraska and Penn State certainly are on the radar. They also talk about the top 4 seeds that we saw and the big reveal of the top 16 teams from the selection committee. All of that and much more on this in-depth bracketology conversation here on Podcast on the Brink. Buying tickets to sports and concerts can be complicated and confusing, but there is a better way to buy, and that is with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to every type of live event. Whether you're searching for a last-minute deal, planning a night out, or need to find the perfect gift, SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There is nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. I can vouch that it is by far the easiest way that I have found to shop for tickets. I can be anywhere, and with just a few taps, I can instantly find seats. I'm planning on doing that with my wife. We have a 17-month-old, but we're planning some date nights out, and one of the things we're going to do is look for some musicians that we want to see, and SeatGeek will be the first place that we go to look for concert tickets here in Dallas where we live, so hopefully we can find some, because we know if they're there and if there are good prices, then we will find them on SeatGeek, because SeatGeek is designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever. SeatGeek saves you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and help you find amazing deals. And best of all, Podcast on the Brink listeners get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code BRINK today, BRINK, for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase.
And we're pleased to be joined on this episode of Podcast on the Brink by a good friend, Andy Bottoms, who, as you all know, is one of the founders and regular contributors to the Assembly Call. And he's also, in my opinion, the best bracketologist on the web. So we appreciate Andy taking the time out to join us. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So over the weekend, the NCAA, in what I have kind of called as just, a thing to maybe drum up some interest in the sport from a national perspective, they revealed a mock bracket, really only with the top 4 teams in each region at this point. So it's just 16 teams. But just to kind of give people, I think, a little taste of where things stand as of today. It won't mean much, obviously, in a couple weeks when the actual bracket is revealed. But for someone like you who covers this stuff as you do and follow it as closely as anybody, is that appointment viewing for you? Is that something you kind of sit down and you want to see right away what the committee at this point is thinking?
It's interesting. I mean, because ultimately what I'm trying to do is predict what the committee is going to do, not necessarily create something that how I would see it if I was the one in charge. And I think that's the thing that people often, kind of you see different people getting, attacked on Twitter about like, why do you have this person? You just don't like this team. Like, that's not really the exercise. The exercise is to figure out what they're doing. And for this particular committee in this year, this is really your only glimpse to get anything tangible to latch onto that tells you, what they really value, how they're viewing teams so far. It gives you a little bit of a progress report in that regard. So I think it's useful. I think it's obviously timed strategically right after the Super Bowl when people might be starting to come around to college basketball a bit more and kind of as a, way for people to catch up on who the better teams are and things like that. So I think it's useful in that regard. To your point, how much changes between now and a month from now, it remains to be seen. But I think they said on the broadcast that 14 of the 16 last year ended up being still on those top 4 seed lines, which I guess kind of makes sense when you figure you played about 75% of your season. In the Big Ten's case, probably closer to 80% of your season. So I guess that part isn't all that shocking.
The interesting thing to me about it, and I mentioned this yesterday, I was on Kent Sterling's show, and he asked me my opinion on just the whole exercise in general and whether I thought it was useful. I don't quite understand the rationale in doing the top 4 from each bracket. I think it would be actually more interesting to see at this point who the last couple of teams in are or the first couple of teams out, because, I think we all know for the most part that Purdue is, a number 1 or a 2 seed. We know that Virginia is going to be a 1 seed, but I think, as we get closer to the actual bracket being revealed, the intrigue to me is always which teams are kind of right there on the cut line and who's in or who's out. Do you agree with, maybe doing something like that in the future to kind of give people an idea of where things stand on those last couple of bubble teams, or would that be something that would be too hard to do at this point?
I mean, to me, I guess in the sense that it's probably, if you figure the committee is, it sounds like they, convene partly for this exercise, partly just to, work together a little bit, kind of have some initial discussions on teams. So maybe to have them go through the entirety of the exercise would be a little bit to ask of them, I suppose. But I would agree with you that certainly from a bracketology perspective, those are the ones that are a lot harder for me as I'm sitting there, last night trying to make, the last few decisions. Those are the ones that are a lot harder than the top teams. And yeah, you might, miss a team here and there by a seed line even toward the top. But the kinds of things that get discussion when you think about getting to championship week, it's all about the 1 seeds and the bubble and pretty much nothing else in between. And so I think that would be valuable, because in the current state, I'm just left to try to take what they revealed in that reveal and then kind of extrapolate that to, all right, well, now here's a bubble team. How would I apply what I think is the criteria that they really used and valued for those kinds of teams? And I think that would, create a little bit more intrigue as well, even as you're thinking of games of, hey, this team was just announced that it was on the bubble. This is a really important game for them. I know ESPN last night was talking a lot about the BPI thing in the Baylor and Texas game, about how big of a swing that was, where a little bit of it was like kind of ramming it down your throat, but it was kind of the idea was, hey, these could be bubble teams and this is why this is important. So I think certainly get a little bit extra pop for that, as opposed to like, well, this team could be a 3 seed or a 4 seed kind of thing, because the top ones are usually pretty easy to peg.
So when you saw the list of the top 16 at this point, was there anything that kind of stood out to you or jumped out immediately? Any surprises, anything that you maybe didn't agree with? Because I know you obviously went with those. You're trying to kind of get your bracket as close as possible to what it would be if the committee were to put together a full bracket. So you went ahead and in this week's update that you did on the site, you went ahead and used those top 16. Was there anything maybe you would have done differently had you not seen the mock bracket over the weekend?
Not on the one line. A couple that stood out to me. I was surprised that Texas Tech wasn't a 2 seed. I think they've certainly had some injuries and dealt with that. But I think from just a, kind of quality win standpoint, I think they've, been up there with a lot of the teams that were on that 2 line. Cincinnati's a really interesting one that did make it on the 2 line. Their schedule, just because the American Athletic Conference isn't that great, they don't have a ton of, top end wins versus Texas Tech has won at Kansas and things like that. Even Duke, I think there's a little bit of, this is how good this team ought to be. And one of the things that really comes through is the wins matter a whole lot more than the losses, whereas Duke has taken losses to two teams that aren't going to make the tournament in all likelihood, in Boston College and St. John's. Those were kind of glossed over, I think, in the way that, some of the good wins are thought of. So in that middle part was that one. And then I think everybody's kind of, beaten Oklahoma to death a little bit, where it became pretty clear when the committee chair, Bruce Rasmussen, was out, said they have 6 quadrant 1 wins, which is fine. And the other thing people would throw out is, well, they've lost 6 of 8. Well, that doesn't matter. The committee's kind of gone away from the, how have you played lately? A game in March is the same as a game in November. Whether we agree with that or not, that's the way that they view it, or at least say they view it. But, recent losing streak aside, Oklahoma, outside of those wins, there's definitely some blemishes there. And so I thought you saw teams like them and Arizona get the nod over, not mid-majors, but, teams outside of major conferences like Rhode Island and Gonzaga, who have both played really well. So I probably would have had those two in as the, last couple 4 seeds, and maybe not Arizona, in light of their, loss to UCLA and then the way Oklahoma has, dropped some games lately. So those would probably be the big things. Definitely no issues on the one line, and really stuff more around the fringes.
When you look at this new quadrant system, and it's obviously a kind of new wrinkle to what you do as a bracketologist, putting this together on a week-to-week basis, do you like this new system? Do you see any flaws in it? I mean, kind of from your perspective, is it a positive thing that they're kind of moved to this, or did you prefer the way it was before? Any kind of thoughts on the new system?
No matter what you pick, you're always picking a somewhat arbitrary cutoff. So how you arrived at, quadrant 1 is home games against 1 to 30 instead of 1 to 25 or 35 or 32 or whatever, is always just kind of, somewhat arbitrary. I like it in the sense that I do think it gives, teams that perform well on the road a little bit of a bump in terms of their quality wins. Road wins was something that they really focused on in that broadcast where they revealed the field. So I think I don't know that it's all that different in the end. I think it's probably a net positive for teams to be able to have some wins maybe that before would have been considered not as good, be considered as quality wins. But the, flip side of that is, if I beat, the team ranked 30th at home versus the team ranked 31st at home, is that really that much different? And yet, it's kind of this huge delineator between those. But that was always the case before of, top 25, top 50 wins. And you're having the same argument. So I think you still got to dig a little bit deeper and actually look at who the teams were, how close were those to the, kind of those cutoff points. Because if you don't do that, then, you can't say that every win within those buckets is the exact same as every other win within those buckets.
I want to dig in a little bit to some of the Big Ten teams, obviously covering Indiana.
Hey, Jerod here. I wasn't able to make this conversation, unfortunately, but I do want to hop in for just a second and remind you about our friends at HoosierProud.com. And hopefully you have checked out their website. You've been checking out their website. Maybe you've even made a purchase or two for yourself or for a gift. But if you haven't, now is a great time to go check out HoosierProud.com. And a few reasons why you should be checking them out. Really, any list of reasons for why to check out HoosierProud.com is going to begin with their designs, because they have some really, really cool, stylish, unique, interesting designs. Whether you want designs that are inspired by unique elements of the Hoosier State, that aren't necessarily sports related, or if you want to go sports related, especially when it comes to Indiana, they have a lot of officially licensed Indiana gear, football shirts, basketball shirts, the cool AJ Moye themed t-shirts that we told you about earlier this season. Plus, they have Inside the Hall t-shirts and Assembly Call t-shirts. So if you're fans of the show that Andy and I host together, or obviously Inside the Hall here and Podcast on the Brink, those t-shirts go to support our sites, and they're also really cool shirts to wear around. So that's the first reason, is they have great designs at HoosierProud.com. And then, as we've been telling you about, they support Indiana-based charities. So you can go to HoosierProud.com, see the charities that your t-shirt sales will support, and I don't know, perhaps most important of all, maybe more important than the rest of the reasons, is that you save money. Hoosier Pride has always been so generous with our audience at the Assembly Call, and obviously with you guys here at Podcast on the Brink. So when you go to HoosierProud.com and when you make a purchase, when you use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, you get 15% off of the entire purchase. It's not just the Inside the Hall t-shirts. It's not just the first t-shirt. It's everything that's in your shopping cart. So it's a really generous offer. Again, go to HoosierProud.com, browse all the t-shirts, all the long sleeve shirts, the sweatshirts. They've got a lot of stuff there. You'll support Indiana-based charities when you're there. And if you use the promo code BRINK, BRINK, you will get 15% off of your entire order. All right, now back to Alex and Andy talking about some of the Big Ten teams and how they stack up as it pertains to the bracket and bracketology. Here we go.
I want to dig in a little bit to some of the Big Ten teams, obviously covering Indiana and following the Big Ten as closely as I do. That's kind of where my interests lie, and people listening to this podcast as well. I think there is some interest in just the state of the Big Ten overall, and you've been pretty consistent throughout the season, or at least recent weeks, with having just 4 Big Ten teams in the field. To me right now, an interesting team is Michigan State, because some of the talking heads on ESPN, I'm not going to name any of them by first name, but there's been some chatter that maybe Michigan State is a team that can rise up to the one line. Is that something that you could foresee happening? If so, why? And if not, is it just based on the lack of overall quality wins? It seems like their resume, they've obviously have some good wins. Beating Purdue is obviously the best one. They also beat North Carolina on a neutral court. But beyond that, a lot of wins over Big Ten teams that probably aren't going to be in the field. So Michigan State right now, are you buying them as a team that could move up to the one line, or are they probably capped with the 2 at 2 as their ceiling?
Yeah, it's really difficult. The Big Ten is kind of dragging everybody down. Just, when you look at those buckets, the chances for quality wins are few and far between, and they don't have any in their remaining schedule is all, there's a couple quadrant 2 opportunities, at least if you look at where the teams are right now, 1 in quadrant 3, 1 in quadrant 4. So there's really not a lot of chance for them to improve their standing right now. But if you look at it, like you said, if the tournament started today, they'd have beaten 2 teams that actually would make the field. Now they've only lost 3 games, and all 3 of their losses would have come to teams that would be in the field as well. But that's where it becomes a little bit difficult. When 16 of their 24 wins are against teams in, quadrants 3 and 4, it makes it a little bit hard to gauge exactly how good they are. When you look at that part of it, now when you look at some of the predictive metrics like KenPom and BPI, which are on the team sheets that the committee uses, they obviously rank really highly in those. I don't think they're outside of the top 6 in either of those. So I think they definitely benefit a little bit from here's how good they ought to be and how good they have looked at times. Because I think really, if you looked at it without some of those kinds of things, I'm not even sure they'd be a 3. It would have been a 3 on Sunday when they revealed that. So I think it becomes pretty difficult if they manage to, run the table the rest of the way and go through the Big Ten tournament and they beat Purdue and Ohio State. I think that a 1 seed would be possible depending upon what other people do. But I think in the absence of that, it gets pretty difficult because you really, unless you're playing Duke or unless you're playing Ohio State, Michigan, or Purdue, you don't really have a ton of opportunity to actually get a win that's going to move the needle a whole lot.
Michigan's another interesting one to me because I think everyone agrees at this point that they're solidly in the field. But their schedule here down the stretch, they obviously have Iowa coming up at home. It's a game they should win, but I don't think it really does anything. And then I think these next 3 games after that are going to kind of tell the tale of where they end up. Are they going to be solidly in, or are they going to be maybe a team that is going to have some work to do in the Big Ten tournament? But they've got Ohio State at home, which is obviously a chance for a great win. And then they go to Penn State and Maryland, 2 teams who are, top 40 in KenPom. So they're teams that are capable of beating anybody and obviously have some talent. Michigan, are they, what do they have to do down the stretch here to solidify a spot? Because I know there's not, I think you had them as a 9 seed, so they obviously have a pretty decent leash at this point, but they seem like to me that they really probably can't afford to slip up and you maybe go something like 1-3 the rest of the way and still feel great about their chances.
Yeah, they're a lot like some of the other teams in that kind of 8, 9, 10, even 11 range where they're just, in their case, I think there's not a whole lot that you really can hold against them in terms of bad losses. And in theory, that loss at Northwestern is the worst one they have. I think it helps them that their 2 best wins, which were Michigan State and Texas, both came on the road. They've beaten UCLA, which helps for, bubble purposes, if you want to think of it that way, since UCLA is in that mix as well. But yeah, I think they certainly not dropping the Iowa game would be a big one. And I think if they're able to win, two of those other three, winning one of the, whether it's both road games or beating Ohio State at home, I think helps them quite a bit. But you can very easily see a scenario if they would drop those three Ohio State, Penn State, Maryland games. They walk into the tournament really with, selection, or into the Big Ten tournament with, kind of three quality wins and not a whole lot else. So it drops off pretty well after, you look at those top three wins. They did beat Maryland, but again, that they're not really in contention for an at-large at this point. So I think it becomes difficult. They've got 4 road wins and 6 road neutral court wins. So given what some of the committee members said before, I think that helps their case. But right. They're not super safe at all.
So now we get to the portion of the conversation where I've seen some mock brackets that are including Nebraska. I've seen some that, suggesting that Penn State has a case right now. You don't have either one of these teams right now, even on your first 5 out, I think it was, that you listed today. Let's start with Nebraska. And to me, with both of these teams, I'm just going to preface it with, in my opinion, both of them played embarrassingly bad non-conference schedules. And so whatever their fate may be on Selection Sunday, they can look back to that in a lot of ways and say, if maybe we would have scheduled a little bit stronger, beaten somebody in non-conference, and they have a better argument. But right now, what are your thoughts on Nebraska?
Nebraska, they have one good win, and that's pretty much it. I think that's the hard part with them. They beat Michigan at home. And this is where, we talk about, in a lot of cases, the unbalanced schedule in the Big Ten really helping somebody win the league, as it feels like it's come up so many times in recent years. In this case, it really hurts the chances of another team to make it into the field, because they played Purdue, Michigan State, and Ohio State and Michigan only once, with 3 of those 4 coming on the road, and they only won the one that was at home. But if you look past that Michigan game, their next best wins are either on the road against Northwestern or at home against Boston College. And so, you got 9 of your 19 wins came against quadrant 4 teams, which speaks to some of the non-conference scheduling stuff that you talked about. And unfortunately for them, I think they're playing good basketball. They don't have really a chance to prove it even down the stretch. They've got Maryland, I think Tuesday night at home. Then they go to Illinois, to IU, and then Penn State at home. Those are all quadrant 2 or 3 games, and probably not going to move out of those ranges. So again, they enter the Big Ten tournament with kind of one win over a team that would be projected to make the field. So even though they don't have bad losses per se, I guess, at St. John's, at Penn State would be ones that might fall into that category. It's just hard to convince yourself that they have beaten anybody, and they really haven't had the chances to beat anybody. But the fact remains that, you got to have shown that you can beat good teams, and with the emphasis on quality wins, I just struggle to see where they would make it without a deep Big Ten tournament run that would allow them to beat, 2 or 3 of those kind of top 4 teams.
As far as Penn State goes, they obviously have some more opportunities than Nebraska here down the stretch. They've got Ohio State at home, they go to Purdue, they got Michigan at home, and then they go to Nebraska. Now, if they were to go something like 3-1 or 4-0 over that stretch, I think they can totally change their outlook. But they're another team to me, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, their best non-conference win is over Montana. They lost to Rider at home. They lost to Wisconsin at home, which is not obviously a good loss this year. They lost to Minnesota at home. So they're playing better, obviously. Getting Josh Reeves back has helped them quite a bit. I know he missed a decent amount of games there, but I mean, to me, if they play well down the stretch, maybe they have a chance to potentially leapfrog Nebraska in terms of at least what they've accomplished in terms of wins.
Yeah, I think when you look at who has opportunities to really help themselves over the remainder of the regular season, they stand out. Ohio State does to a certain extent as well. But yeah, I mean, they've got, 3 of those games that they have are quadrant 1 games right now. And the Michigan one is kind of borderline. It's in quadrant 2. If they play well, that could be, quadrant 1. Now, based on what I've seen from them, I find it hard to believe they're going to win all 4 of those games, or probably even 3 of those games, but at least they have the chance to potentially play their way in. But yeah, really, other than that, the buzzer beater at Ohio State, they did beat Nebraska at home when they played, and have beaten Maryland at home. Those are their only, quadrant 1 and 2 wins. So once you get past that, there's just not a lot there. The non-conferences you mentioned, they beat Montana, they beat Pitt. George Mason, I think, is another one that's up there. So yeah, I just struggle to believe with throwing the lack of quality wins and the number of what most people would consider to be bad losses, and things can get interesting. But Ohio State, they go on the road to Penn State and Michigan. They play Rutgers at home, and then they go to IU. So that's 2 quadrant 1 games and a quadrant 2 game that they can improve their standing a little bit. So that if there's anybody who can really gain, or I guess potentially really lose ground down the stretch, I think Ohio State and Penn State are probably the ones to watch in that regard.
Is there anyone else in the Big Ten at this point who is even on the radar? I mean, Maryland is, 38th in KenPom, but they have 10 losses, haven't really done much besides beat Butler and beat Penn State. I mean, that's not much of a resume. I mean, are they the only team that would even be maybe in the mix at all? If they've got at Nebraska, Rutgers at home, at Northwestern, and Michigan at home to close out. So I guess they have the chance to beat Michigan. But other than that, their resume seems pretty bare. But it seems weird to talk about a potential 20-win Big Ten team not even really being in the mix. But I guess that's kind of
multiple.
The state of the Big Ten this year is just the league is very top heavy, and after you get outside of those top 3 or 4 teams, there's just not a whole lot to hang your hat on.
Yeah, and some of that really goes back to how much the league struggled in non-conference play. They just lost a lot of games that probably show up as bad losses and missed opportunities to get quality wins. And so you kind of lay that as the foundation, and you didn't have anybody that high to begin with. And while those 2 teams have really separated themselves, particularly those top 3, everybody else is just kind of beating each other up in the middle, and nobody had a high enough RPI to begin with. So they're just kind of cannibalizing one another at that point. It's almost the inverse of what you see in the SEC, where everybody the league performed really well at a conference, and now almost anybody that you play is some kind of quality winner, at least in one of those top 2 quadrants. And the Big 12 kind of the same deal, where you can almost play every game, and it's a chance to really improve your status. The Big 10, it's more of how not to stub your toe at this point for most of these teams.
So I can't let you go, Andy, without asking, and don't hang up the phone, but Indiana right now, they're I think 14-12. They have won 2 in a row. They got a game on Wednesday against Illinois. What at this point are there? I don't even want to talk about the NCAA tournament, but the NIT, is that a possibility? Is that something that they could potentially get a bid for, and maybe talk a little bit about the differences in terms of how the NIT works in getting a bid? Because I know there's some out of control factors that Indiana could be battling against if they're one of the teams that are maybe vying for one of the last spots to get in the NIT.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I mean, the NCAA tournament at this point, IU hasn't beaten, kind of go back to using some of the same things that I used earlier about other teams. I mean, they don't have any wins over anybody who'd be in the tournament if it started today. Obviously, Notre Dame has fallen off due to injury, and so that would be taken into account to a certain extent. But really, other than that, and Penn State, Maryland type games at home, there really just isn't enough quality there to do it, and there isn't enough opportunity left to get more. So in essence, that's kind of out the window at this point. When you look at the NIT, the oddity there, which I think is actually a good thing for the teams that are involved, just maybe not good for a team like IU, depending on what happens, is so basically the way that they've done it, and I'm not sure when they started this, it's certainly been the last few years, but if a team wins its regular season conference, or wins its conference in the regular season, but they don't win the conference tournament, so they don't get to go to the NCAA tournament, then they basically have an automatic bid to the NIT. So again, for those teams, the regular season still means something and gives them a chance to play in the postseason. Obviously, that leaves a pretty big spectrum of number of at-large teams that you might need or not need for the NIT. So the more regular season champs that get upset during championship week, the fewer bids there are to hand out to teams like IU or anybody else who might be wanting to get into the NIT. So I guess it's a case where if IU plays well down the stretch and they're really in that conversation, root for the favorites in these conference tournaments, and I think that increases their chances. But I do think they're on the radar for that. Certainly need to continue playing the way that they have down the stretch, and really try to pick up another. Those Nebraska and Ohio State games loom really large. IU obviously has some bad losses that would potentially be held against them. But to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not exactly sure how or if the NIT selection criteria differs all that much from the NCAA one. I know it's not the same committee, obviously, but I have to feel like there are probably some extra factors in terms of attendance and who's a good draw that probably get a little bit more attention than maybe they would like to admit that they do.
Right.
For a tournament that typically doesn't get a lot of attention. I can't say that with any certainty, but I think you could probably find examples. If there's a kind of a tiebreaker scenario between a couple teams, you could easily see where that would help somebody, and obviously would help a team like IU with the interest that they draw and kind of the way they've played over the latter part of the season.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going out on a limb to say that if Indiana has a chance to host an NIT game this year, they would do it if they get offered the opportunity after last year's debacle. But it would be interesting, I think, because from an Indiana perspective, and I know you follow it as closely as I do, they seem like a team who is playing their best basketball right now. I know they had the tough losses to that gauntlet of teams, but and they've got some chances here, obviously, down the stretch to get, obviously the Ohio State game at home could be huge, but then you go to the Big Ten tournament and you never know what happens. So I think it's going to be a fascinating close to the season, not only for Indiana, but just having the Big Ten tournament maybe actually mean something this year for NCAA tournament seeding perspective, because it's ending a week earlier than usual. And I know in the past the committee has said that they don't always factor in what happens in the Big Ten tournament final, and now they'll have a week kind of to sit back and digest that, and hopefully that carries some weight for whoever does win the Big Ten tournament. So I'm looking forward to the conclusion of the season here.
Yeah, it should be good. I will tell you that there's been many years in the past when I have kind of wrestled with, do I move this team because of the results of the Big Ten championship, being what it is, and the committee. And I feel like every time I've actually moved somebody, I should have just stuck with my original instincts, because I'm not sure that they really paid a whole lot of attention to it, unless there was somebody who just wouldn't have made the field at all,
right?
That they would have had to look at. So in that regard, I think it'll mean a little bit more. And I think you've got some of these teams that are really on the fringe where, a deep run in that's going to be a necessity, and trying to find a way to meet up with some of the better teams and get some quality wins. So as much as I'm not looking forward to the timing of it and all the jokes about it being in New York and things like that, I think it is going to be meaningful. And if the final four teams in that come down to be, the four teams that most people are projecting to make the NCAA tournament, I think that makes for some pretty good semifinals and finals to watch as well. So it should be good basketball, if nothing else.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Andy, for joining us this week. We always appreciate your perspective, and follow Andy on Twitter at Andy Bottoms. Check out his bracketology every week on Inside the Hall. It's been a great addition to the site. I actually look forward to his emails every week telling me that the new bracket's in there, because I get to see it before anybody else, and it's really good stuff that he's putting together on a week-to-week basis. So make sure to follow him. Check out his bracketology every week. And thanks again, Andy, for joining the show. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me.
All right, so at the beginning of the episode, I told you about Blue Apron. And again, we have an affiliate relationship with them. So if you've been thinking about trying Blue Apron, go to InsideTheHall.com/Blue Apron. You can get $30 off of your first meal order, and we'll get a commission as well. So again, it's a great way to support the show, a great way to get started with Blue Apron at a discount and kind of give it a try. And in advance of doing this, I decided to try it out myself. My wife and I have talked about doing it, and so we finally decided to start doing it here in the new year. And I would say so far, so good. We've done 4 meals. I've enjoyed 4 of them. My wife, she didn't necessarily like the one that we had last night as much. We had a Cajun kale quiche, and she's just not a big quiche person, so that's really why. She actually said it tasted pretty good for a quiche, but she said in the future we shouldn't use our Blue Apron meals for a quiche, which I think is probably right. But some of the other meals that we had seared grass-fed steaks with sweet chili glazed vegetables. We had ancho orange chicken with kale rice and roasted carrots. And obviously it's great to, look at the menu, choose what you want to eat, and then you get this box. We get our orders on Friday afternoon. This box comes on Friday afternoon, and everything is in there. All the ingredients are portioned out correctly. There's really easy instructions. And so it makes cooking and preparing these meals a pretty simple process, and it's fun. And look, if you just want to have a good meal and eat it simply, Blue Apron is great. If you are kind of an amateur chef, and I would barely call myself an amateur chef. I mean, I enjoy cooking. I'm not that great at it, but I do like learning kind of new cooking techniques. And so that to me has been the most fun part about this. Like making the kale rice. Like that's not something I'd thought about before, but my young daughter, she's about 18 months old. She loves eating that rice. And so now, by going through and doing this, I learned how to do that. Now I can go make it on my own. So that's kind of been, a secondary or a tertiary bonus. So anyway, just give it a try. Check out InsideTheHall.com/Blue Apron. They've been around for a while, so, pretty trustworthy. The boxes with the meals come, really reliably. Everything in there has been fresh, has tasted really good, and they have a lot of great options. So you get a few options you can choose from. You can get them whatever day of the week that you want. So they really try and tailor the experience to you. They try to do it in a sustainable way, which is nice. So yeah, just that's my pitch. Give it a try. InsideTheHall.com/Blue Apron. And if you live anywhere near a Costco actually has a nice little gift certificate deal. I think for like $100 you can get $150 worth of Blue Apron meals, and so we did that, and so it was actually a way to get even better value for our money, and that still works with the $30 off that you get when you go to InsideTheHall.com/Blue Apron. So just a little pro tip there. All right, that's it. Give it a try, and when you do, let me know. Send me a note at Assembly Call or email me, Jerod at assemblycall.com, and I'd love to know how it goes for you. InsideTheHall.com/Blue Apron. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. To get more from me and from Alex, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana University basketball. If you liked this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member who loves IU basketball as much as you do. You can also support the show by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, which helps us get the word out to more IU fans like yourself. We will be back next week with a new episode. Until then, as always, go Hoosiers.